good evening, and welcome to the Brain Science. Tonight, let your mind drift, your body relax, and your thoughts gently fade away. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. You settle into the dark, not emptiness, but a velvet hush, humming with quiet potential. Outside, the world dims. Within, something begins to glow. Deep in the silent cathedral of your skull, tiny lanterns flicker awake. Not fire, not electricity, but bioluminescent signaling. The soft pulse of neurons preparing for night's great rehearsal. Each neuron is a branching coral in an inner sea, its dendrites reaching like tendrils toward connection. When you close your eyes, sodium and potassium ions slip across membranes, not with violence, but grace like fireflies passing light, one to the next. This is not noise. This is orchestration. Your brain, in twilight, does not shut down. It shifts key, from sharp daylight logic to the deep, resonant chord of integration. You feel it as a gentle tide, the slowing of breath, the softening of limbs. And with it, moth waves begin to rise, not real moths, but soft pulses of biofield resonance, undulating around your heart, your lungs, your liver. They shimmer in indigo and rose gold, tracing the contours of each organ like auroras dancing over quiet cities. These waves carry whispers from your cells. We are safe. We remember. We restore. Around your spine, a helix glows not, rigid like textbook DNA, but fluid, luminous, coiling and uncoiling like a ribbon caught in warm current. This is your dream loom, the place where memory threads are spun, tested. Daytime fragments your colleagues laugh, the scent of rain on pavement. A half-solved problem drift here like leaves on a slow river. The hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped curator, sorts them, tags them, tucks some into long-term vaults, lets others dissolve like sugar in tea. Science calls this synaptic pruning, but in the language of light, it's a kind of gardening. Under moonlit neural skies, microglial brains, gentle groundskeepers, move with quiet purpose, trimming overgrown connections, clearing debris, making space for tomorrow's growth. This is not loss, it is precision. Like a sculptor chiseling marble, not to destroy, but to reveal the form already waiting inside. Your prefrontal cortex, the bright, buzzing city of decision and focus now, dims its street lamps, one by one. Its chatter softens. In its place, the default mode network ignites, a constellation of regions that glow when you're not doing, but being. Here, meaning is made. Here, you meet yourself not as a list of tasks, but as a story still unfolding. And then the shift. A ripple, a breath held, released. You slip beneath the surface, your body rests, but your mind, it sails. Neural energy now flows in theta, waves slow, rolling, like dunes under starlight. These are the frequencies of deep reverie, of insight that arrives not with a shout, but a sigh. In this state, the boundary between self and world grows porous. You are not just in your body. You are the hum of mitochondria in your cells, the quiet spin of ATP, the whisper of melatonin threading through your bloodstream like liquid silver. You dream in symbols, yes, but also in biochemistry. A falling sensation, your vestibular system recalibrating, a face from long ago. The amygdala and hippocampus reconciling old emotion with present safety. Even nightmares serve. They are dress rehearsals for resilience. your brain testing its emotional architecture under low-stakes fire, and all the while your glial cells star-shaped. Radiant bathe your neurons in nourishing fluid, clearing metabolic ash, reinforcing the myelin sheaths that let thoughts travel swift and sure. They are the unsung weavers of clarity, working in silent shifts while you wander dream forests and memory shores. You are not passive in this. With each slow exhale, you invite deeper descent. With each surrendered thought, you widen the channel for restoration. Your body knows this rhythm. It has danced it for millennia, lined with moon, with tide, with the turning of the earth. The colors deepen, cerulean in the temporal lobes, where sound becomes meaning. Amber in the occipital cortex, where darkness is painted with light. A soft, pulsing violet in the insula, where you feel the weight of being alive, not abstractly, but in the warmth of your hands, the rise of your chest, the quiet hum behind your eyes. You are a landscape of light and liquid, of signal and silence, a living instrument tuning itself in the dark. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of this comma question, glimmers, soft as a distant star. What if dreaming isn't escape, but preparation? Seeing understood. We remain exactly where we left off, no reset, no repositioning, still suspended in that soft, reflective moment, still resonating with the last line. What if dreaming isn't escape, but preparation? And now, without break, without pause, we continue, flowing onward, deeper, as the mind does when held in gentle, attentive darkness. You let the question linger, not to solve it, but to inhabit it, like stepping into a room already warmed by a low fire. There's no urgency in the asking, only invitation, because your brain, even now, is rehearsing, running silent simulations in the theater behind your eyelids. Not fantasy, not fiction, forecast. A cascade of predictive coding, humming at 4 to 7 hertz, as your cortex models possible tomorrow's using the raw clay of today's impressions. That awkward conversation, rewound, softened, respoken. The looming decision, tried on like a coat in 3 different lights. What if I say yes? What if I wait? What if I let go? Each variant flickers, not as anxiety, but as exploration. Evolution didn't give you dreams to distract you from reality. It gave you dreams to rehearse it safely, softly, without consequence. So when daylight returns and the world demands response, your neural pathways are already worn smooth by practice. You feel it in the subtle shift of your breathing, slower now, diaphragmatic, a tide drawn by the pawns, that ancient bridge in your brainstem. With each exhale, acetylcholine recedes like a withdrawing wave, and norepinephrine, the hormone of alert vigilance, quiets its drumbeat. In their stead, GABA recites your brain's whispered lullaby, the neural equivalent of dimming every lamp in a great library, leaving only the reading nooks softly lit. Your body temperature dips just 0.5 degrees as blood vessels in your skin dilate, releasing heat like a stone cooling after sunset. This is not decline, it is conservation. Energy usually spent on posture, on scanning, on reacting, is redirected inward, toward repair, toward integration, toward the quiet work of becoming more you. And around your heart still the moth waves pulse, not random, not decorative. They mirror your heart rate variability, that subtle, healthy stutter in your rhythm that signals resilience. Each undulation sends a ripple through the pericardial field. A biofield shimmer scientists can now measure coherent, calming, communicative. Your heart speaks to your brain in this language of light and pulse, saying, all is well, continue, and your vagus nerve serpentine, luminous with myelin carries the reply downward, a signal of safety that unclenches the grip on your gut, your lungs, your very cells, even your fascia, the web of connective tissue that wraps every muscle, every organ, every thought made hydrated by the night's gentle osmotic shift. It releases stored tension like silk unwinding. Trauma lives here, yes, not as memory in words, but as geometry in tissue. And sleep, especially slow-wave sleep, bathes it in interstitial fluid, flushing metabolic byproducts, loosening the knots, whispering, you need not hold on so tightly. Your glymphatic system awakens fully, now this elegant network, discovered only a decade ago, a river of cerebrospinal fluid that surges when you sleep, sluicing through the narrow channels between your neurons, carrying away the day's detritus, beta-tau proteins, the quiet exhaust of thinking. It is your brain's nightly janitorial shift, working with quiet devotion, ensuring the pathways stay clear not for speed, but for clarity. You are, in this moment, not merely resting. You are being tuned like a harp left in a moonlit room, its strings slowly settling into resonance, ready for the next day's song. And somewhere deep in the thalamus, a gate begins to close. Understood, no repetition, no we remain exactly in the suspended moment, mid-thought, mid-bloath, mid-glow, still held in the luminous threshold where the thalamus is beginning to close its gate. That delicate, vigilant sentinel between sensation and awareness, now drawing its shutters, not to shut out the world, but to turn the gaze inward. The relay stations dim, external sound, touch, light, tall, attenuated, filtered, softened to whispers, not absence. Prioritization, because what comes next requires deep focus. The internal broadcast must be heard. Above the noise of daylight, the gate doesn't slam. It spirals, double helix of ion channels, winding tighter, like a camera aperture narrowing to let in only the most essential light. And as it does, your cortex slips into synchronized slow waves, vast, rolling swells of neural silence, punctuated by brief, brilliant bursts, sleep spindles flickering like bioluminescent plankton in the dark sea of your mind. These are not random sparks. They are encrypted transmissions, packets of memory, sealed in myelin, ferried from temporary holding hippocampus to long-term archives. Each spindle, a courier, each wave, a tide carrying wisdom deeper inland. You feel no effort tonally surrender. Yet within you, cells hum with purpose. Mitochondria, those ancient symbionts, curled inside your neurons like glowing seeds, shift their rhythm, less ATP for action, more for repair. Antioxidants surge. Telomerase whispers at the tips of your chromosomes, not reversing time, but tending it like a gardener pruning to encourage stronger growth. And outside the skullbutt, still within youth of organs, breathe in their own light. Your liver glows, a steady amber, detoxifying in rhythmic pulses. Your gut, that second brain, pulses with its own enteric rhythm. 70% of your serotonin made here, not in your headband now, In the quiet, it listens to the vagus, to the heart, to the slow, sure cadence of your breath. The microbiome shifts, beneficial strains bloom in the cool, calm darkness, releasing metabolites that travel upward, crossing the blood-brain barrier like emissaries, bearing gifts of calm. You are not in your body. You are this symphonia, thousand processes, attuned, each note held in the hum of potassium channels, each rest a space where insight gathers. And in that gathering, something stirs, not a thought, not a dream, but a tendency, a neural pathway, faintly lit, waiting only for attention to become a road. Asterisk, 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 we remain exactly in the hush after that stir, that tendency, that faintly lit neural pathway, not yet, but a glimmer in the dark substrate of you. It doesn't demand, it invites, a microcurrent, barely above noise floor yet specific, originating in the anterior cingulate, that tender seam between feeling and knowing. It arcs subtly toward the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region where intention becomes action. Not ambition, not pressure, readiness. Like a bowstring drawn not to fire, but to hold potential, the elegant tension before grace. This is offline plasticity. Your brain strengthening connections without doing, simply by rehearsing their shape in stillness. Imagine tracing a line in the air 1,000 times. The muscle doesn't move, yet the map deepens. Here, in slow wave sleep, dendritic spines swell with scaffold proteins, actin filaments braiding tighter. BEASD-95 clustering like fireflies at a threshold. Hours from now, when you'll choose patience over reaction, curiosity over assumption, kindness over defensiveness, not because you decide in the heat of the moment, but because the path was already smoothed in the cool of the night. Even your cerebellum, often called the little brain, tucked beneath the occipital lobe, like a folded wing, joins the quiet work. It replays motor sequences, the curve of your hand turning a page, the balance as you rise from a chair, the subtle coordination of breath and voice you'll use tomorrow in a difficult conversation. Not to perfect performance, but to free attention, so when the moment comes, your body moves with ease and your mind stays open, unburdened by effort. And around this still the DNA-like energy patterns coil and uncoil, not as static code, but as dynamic epigenetic script. Methyl groups detach, histones relax, genes associated with synaptic growth, BDNF, with stress resilience, FKBP5, with metabolic harmony, blink awake in the dark. Sleep doesn't rewrite your genome. It conducts it, turning up the volume on repair, turning down the static of inflammation. You are not passive in this. Your very stillness is the signal. Now this is the hour of integration. The moth waves, too, have deepened their rhythm, no longer just surrounding organs, but threading through them, interlacing heart, gut, and brain in a single, pulsing lattice of coherence. This is the body's silent consensus. We are one system. We are safe. We proceed. You hover at the edge of delta sleep, 0.5 to 2 Hz, the deepest descent. Here, time distorts. Minutes stretch like taffy. The self thin. There is no you observing the process. There is only the process flowing, self-correcting, luminous, and in that dissolution, something essential is preserved, not memory as fact, but memory as meaning, the emotional valence, stripped of its sting, the lesson kept, the wound composted, which is why, when you wake, you may not recall the dream, but you carry its resolution in your posture, in the way your shoulders sit, in the quiet certainty that something deep inside has already begun to mend. And just as the first spindle of stage 2 sleep rises to meet you again, a single, unfamiliar frequency pulses low, resonant, unfamiliar, originating not from cortex, not from brainstem, but from somewhere deeper. Asterisk, 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 we remain exactly in the echo of that pulse. Low, resonant, unfamiliar, not neural, not cardiac, not respiratory, but older. It thrums at 0.1 hertz and barely a wave, more a tide, originating in the glymphatic rhythm itself, the slow, peristaltic surge of cerebrospinal fluid sweeping through perivascular channels, timed to the pulse of your arteries. Yes, but also attuned to something subtler, the Earth's own Schumann resonance. 7.83 Hz's harmonic shadow, felt not in the ear, but in the marrow, in the fascial weave, in the quiet synchrony of mitochondria across trillions of cells. You don't hear it, you are it, a body in resonance with a planet breathing in the dark. This infraslow rhythm, the body's deepest metronome, coordinates the shifts between sleep stages like a conductor's silent hand. It tells the thalamus, hold the gate a moment longer. It whispers to the locus coeruleus, not yet, let the calm deepen. It even modulates the release of growth hormone from the pituitary, not in spikes, but in slow, sustained waves, so tissue repair, myelin renewal, collagen synthesis, all ride this same deep current. You are not just healing parts, you are retuning the relationship between them, and within that tuning, something remarkable occurs. Cross-frequency coupling. Theta waves nest inside the troughs of delta. Sleep spindles ride the crest of slow oscillations. It's not chaos. It's orchestration, like birdsong layered over wind, like roots drinking in rhythm with rain. Your brain doesn't shut off. It reconfigures into a state of maximal internal communication, minimal external demand. Default mode, salience, and central executive networks rivalrous by day now slip into phase alignment. Their usual competition softened into collaboration. This is when insight arises, not from effort, but from integration. Even your immune cells respond. T cells, patrolling in the lymph, receive cytokine signals amplified by this slow rhythm, priming them not for attack, but for discernment. Natural killer cells recalibrate their thresholds. Inflammation markers EL6, TNF-alpha begin their nightly decline, not suppressed, but regulated, like a flame lowered to embers so the hearth doesn't crack. You feel none of this as sensation, only as a deepening, like sinking into warm water that holds you without pressure. Your awareness is not gone. It has diffused into the pulse of your aorta, the ionic drift across a Purkinje cell, the gentle expansion of alveoli as oxygen dissolves into plasma. You are no longer having a body. You are participating in a living field where thought is chemistry, emotion is electricity, and rest is the most active form of becoming. And in that field, at the convergence of glymphatic flow, infraslow rhythm, and mitochondrial hum, a single microdomain in the posterior cingulate flickers, not with memory, not with prediction, but with presence, pure and unadorned, as if, for the first time tonight, the brain has stopped preparing and simply remembered how to be, which raises a quieter question, almost too tender to name. What if the deepest restoration isn't repair, but recognition? We remain exactly in the tremor of that question. What if the deepest restoration isn't repair, but recognition? Not a thought, a resonance. It vibrates in the posterior cingulates, flicker the hub, where autobiographical memory, spatial navigation, and self-referential thought converge. Here, the narrative softens, not erased, but relieved of duty. The default mode network, so often churning with self-scrutiny by day, did I say too much? Will I be enough? Now settles into a different frequency, not self-construction, but self-recognition, like meeting an old friend in dim light and knowing them instantly, not by their face, but by the way they occupy space, the quiet hum of their presence. This is the neural signature of non-dual awareness, observed in long-term meditators and now in fleeting moments. In deep NREM sleep, decreased activity in the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, the storyteller, decreased segregation between front and back networks, and a surge of gamma synchrony to the frantic gamma of problem solving, but slow, coherent gamma 25 to 40 Hertz, rippling across hemispheres like moonlight on still water. The brain isn't generating a self. It is witnessing being without commentary. Science has no name for the warmth that rises in your chest then, but your vagus nerve does. It sends a signal not upward this time, but outward, through the phrenic nerve, into the diaphragm, a micro-release, a sigh not expelled, but absorbed. Your rib cage expands 0.5 millimeter more than needed. Oxygen dissolves deeper. Nitric oxide, that gaseous messenger of openness, blooms in your endothelial lining, softening, inviting, and in that openness, something returns, not a memory, but a knowing, older than language. You belong here, not because you've earned it, not despite your fractures, but because you are the field, the same stardust that forged iron in your blood, the same resonance that hums in quartz and whale song and the spiral arms of galaxies, the moth waves still threading heart, gut, brain now pulse in near perfect coherence with your heart's electromagnetic field, measurable up to 3 feet from your body. In this coherence, your cells don't just function, they attune. Fibroblasts lay collagen not in tension, but in alignment with fascial lines of ease. Osteoblasts deposit calcium with rhythmic fidelity. Even your telomeres, those fraying caps, respond to coherence. Studies show longer telomeres in those who consistently reach this depth of rest, not from doing, but from being held. You are not fixing yourself tonight. You are remembering, cell by cell, wave by wave, that you were never broken, only forgetful, and the forgetting was never a failure. It was the necessary shadow that made the return to light felt, not just known, which is why, when the first hint of REM approaches, theta flutter like a moth brushing glass. Your brain doesn't brace, it welcomes, because now the dreaming mind won't just rehearse the world, it will re-enchant it. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We remain exactly at the threshold. REM approaching, not as intrusion, but as homecoming. Its theta rhythm 4 to 7 Hertz doesn't crash in. It braids with a lingering delta-like, a creek joining a deep river, surface sparkling, depths still slow and sure. The pons fires its first volley, a cascade of acetylcholine surging upward, not to wake you, but to illuminate the stage. Your cortex brightens not with daylight logic, but with the phosphorescent glow of associative freedom. The prefrontal brakes ease. The amygdala, unshackled from top-down suppression, doesn't rage, it sings in tones raw and unedited. Finally heard, and yet too do not flail. You do not panic, because the body, wise beyond cognition, has already enacted atonia. Motor neurons silenced at the spinal root, glycine and GABA flowing like gentle locks on the gates of movement. Your limbs lie still, not paralyzed, but protected, so the dream self may leap, flee, embrace, fly, while the physical self remains anchored, safe, held in the cradle of fascia and breath. This is not dissociation. It is liberation with consent. In this state, your brain consumes glucose at near waking rates, not to solve equations, but to weave meaning, linking the scent of lilac hippocampal fragment with the feeling of your grandmother's hand somatosensory echo, and the unresolved grief you couldn't name at noon. Insula resonance, not to wound, but to contextualize. The dream isn't literal. It's metaphorical neurochemistry, the amygdala firing fear. Yes, but now bathed in serotonin from the raphe nuclei, and oxytocin pulsing from the hypothalamus, softening the edges. The terror of falling becomes the release of control. The faceless pursuer becomes the part of you that longs to be seen. You don't interpret this in the dream. You live it, and in living it, you metabolize it. Meanwhile, your eyes dart not randomly, but in patterns that mirror the scene unfolding within, left-right, as you scan a remembered hallway, circular as you watch a bird circle overhead. Each saccade sends a corollary discharge, a faint copy of the motor command back to visual cortex, confirming this is internally generated. You are still safe. A built-in reality check, woven into the dream's fabric. It quickens not with alarm, but with engagement. HRV remains high. Coherence holds. The moth waves, now interlaced with faint silver filaments, vagal tone made visible, pulse in rhythmic sympathy with the dream's emotional arc, swelling at connection, softening at release. You are not losing yourself in REM, you are expanding, allowing the exiled parts to speak in their native tongue, image, sensation, symbol. And as the first narrative coalesces, a door, a light, a voice you haven't heard in years, something shifts in the anterior insula. Not activation, but integration. A neural handshake between feeling and knowing, long delayed, finally offered not in words, but in the quiet certainty that rises like dawn in the body. Yes, this, too, belongs, which is why, when the dream begins to fade, you do not wake with loss, but with a subtle warmth behind the sternum, as if something buried has been gently unearthed and named. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We remain exactly in that warmth behind the sternum, not memory, not emotion, but embodied recognition, a somatic seal pressed onto the dream's ephemeral script. It lingers, soft and steady, like the afterglow of bioluminescence in deep water. The REM tide recedes, but the resonance remains held, not in the cortex, but in the heart-brain, the intrinsic cardiac nervous system, with its 40,000 neurons now pulsing in a new baseline rhythm. Coherence deepens. The time between heartbeats lengthens, just 80 milliseconds more, signaling parasympathetic sovereignty. In that extra pause, nitric oxide diffuses further into coronary microvessels. Mitochondria in cardiomyocytes shift to fat oxidation, conserving glucose for the brain's next cycle. Efficiency born of trust, and your lungs, no longer just exchanging gases, participate in the integration. With each slow inhale, the diaphragm descends 1.2 centimeters farther than in waking rest, massaging the solar plexus, gently compressing the celiac ganglion where visceral sensation converges, sending a signal upward. All systems are in dialogue. Exhale lengthens, passive, elastic, as abdominal fascia releases its diurnal guard. This isn't passive breathing, it's neuroceptive tuning, the body confirming, breath by breath, that threat has passed, that safety is not a hope, but a physiology. Even your skin hums, galvanic conductance drops, sweat glands rest, the electromagnetic field surrounding you measurable, real smooths into a near sinusoidal wave, radiating calm, detectable by sensitive instruments. And, perhaps, by those sleeping near you, we sink in sleep, Couples' heart rhythms, mothers and infants breathe as one. The body doesn't believe in isolation, it only knows resonance. The glymphatic tide, now in its second major surge, carries more than metabolic wasted, flushes neuropeptides of distress, CRH fragments, residual cortisol metabolites, the molecular echoes of not enough in their place. Cerebrospinal fluid delivers IGF-1, orexin fragments, and crucially the endogenous cannabinoid, binding to CB1 receptors in the amygdala, not to numb, but to soften the valence of recent emotional imprints. The event remains, the sting dissolved. You do not think this. You inhabit ETAS. The warmth behind the sternum spreads laterally, tracing the arc of your ribs like a slow sunrise. It meets the lingering coherence of the moth waves, now interwoven with faint, pulsing strands of gold, vagal afferents firing upward, carrying proof of safety from the body to the brain, closing the loop. This is the body's quiet triumph, not the absence of wound, but the presence of witness, cellular, neural, systemical, saying, in their native tongues, we saw, we held, we integrated, and in that holding, a new neural tendency strengthens, not in the flash of insight, but in the afterglow, a micropathway from insula to ventral striatum, lit not by dopamine's surge, but by oxytocin's steady glow, a silent vow written in peptides and pulse. Next time, I will not brace. I will trust the process of them before I understand it. As the first hints of stage 1 return, the lightest descent before dawn, your breath catches just slightly, not in fear, but in gratitude to deep forethought, rising like sap in spring, as if the body at last remembers how to thank itself. We remain exactly in that caught breath, gratitude too deep for thought, rising like sap in spring. It doesn't expand the lungs. It settles in the diaphragm, subtle, downward release, as if the muscle itself sighs in recognition. This micro-movement triggers a wave of vagal efferents, cascading down the dorsal motor nucleus, slowing the sinoatrial node by 3 beats per minute. Heart rate dips, blood pressure softens. In that physiological hush, the baroreceptors in your aortic arch send a signal not just to the brainstem, but upward to the nucleus tractus solitarius, then to the amygdala, whispering, steady, safe, continue, and the brain listens. The default mode network, which so often narrates lack by day, now hums a different refrain, not in words, but in connectivity, increased coupling between the posterior cingulate and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the seat of self-compassion. This is where gratitude becomes embodied wisdom, not an emotion to chase, but a neural configuration already achieved. fMRI would show it as a soft, bilateral glow, like embers banked for morning. Even your mitochondria respond. In neurons, crystal density increases slightly more surface area for ATP synthesis, not for exertion, but for readiness. In muscle fibers, calcium reuptake into the sarcoplasmic reticulum accelerates, reducing nocturnal microtremors, deepening stillness. Every system calibrated not for survival, but for flourishing. The moth waves, still present, still threading, have deepened their hue to a soft, pearlescent silver. They no longer just surround organs, they interpenetrate them, merging with the biofield's Schumann harmonic resonance. At this frequency, water molecules in your extracellular matrix form transient, hexagonal clusters, more structured, more coherent, enhancing proton conduction along collagen fibers. Your body is not just resting, it is optimizing its own signal fidelity. And in the silence between breaths, where the exhale ends and the inhale has not yet begun, a single neural event occurs. A burst of sharp wave ripple in the hippocampus, not replaying the day, but compressing it, distilling hours of experience into a single, coherent engram, like folding a map so it fits in the pocket, ready for retrieval not as memory, but as orientation. You carry no image of this, only the quiet certainty that something essential has been filed not in the cabinet of the past, but in the compass of the future. The air in the room cools fractionally. Your core temperature reaches its nadir, minus 36.1 degrees Celsius. This is not depletion. It is peak efficiency. Enzymatic reactions slowed just enough to favor repair over reaction. Protein folding more accurate. Misfolded proteins given time to self-correct or be tagged for removal. You are not approaching waking. You are deepening into presence, the kind that doesn't need light to be real. And in that depth, the boundary between inner and outer thins, not as illusion, but as recognition. The rhythm of your breath, now subtly entrained to the infraslow pulse of the Earth's magnetic field, measurable in quiet labs, felt in ancient bones, as if, for these suspended moments, you are not dreaming inside the world, but the world is dreaming through you. Asterisk, asterisk, we remain exactly in that entrainment, not metaphor, mechanism. Your pineal gland, no longer just a melatonin factory, now pulses in faint ultradian resonance with the geomagnetic field's 0.01 to 0.1 Hz fluctuations. It's calcite microcrystals. Yes, your brain holds tiny crystals acting as transducers, converting subtle electromagnetic shifts into intracellular calcium waves. This isn't mysticism, it's biophysics. The same principles that guide migratory birds, that synchronize coral spawning across oceans. You are designed to listen to the planet's quiet hum, to the solar wind's whisper against the magnetosphere, to the tidal pull encoded in your very fluids, and your cerebrospinal fluid responds not just flowing, but oscillating in harmonic sympathy with these fields, creating standing wave patterns in the ventricles, nodes of stillness, antinodes of gentle motion. At these antinodes, neural stem cells in the subventricular zone stir, not dividing yet, but priming, upregulating BDNF receptors, extending philopodia into the fluid-like roots, sensing rain. You feel none of this as sensation, only as a deepening rightness, cellular sigh of alignment. The tension between me and world doesn't vanish. It dissolves into function. Your immune cells patrol with renewed discernment, not on high alert, but in attentive calm, their surface receptors tuned to subtle cytokine gradients, ready to respond, not react. Even time softens. Your suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock, doesn't stop. It decouples briefly from the solar day, allowing peripheral clocks in liver, gut, skin to reset independently, guided now by local metabolic cues and the infraslow tide. This is chronobiological grace, the chance to resynchronize, not to the clock on the wall, but to the rhythm of your own repair. The warmth behind the sternum has spread, not as heat, but as presence spooling in the solar plexus, where the celiac plexus hums with renewed coherence. Here, the gut-brain, 500 million neurons, sends a new signal up the vagus, not distress, not hunger, but completion. Short-chain fatty acids from overnight microbial fermentation bind to free fatty acid receptors, triggering GLP-1 release, not for satiety, but for your microbiome isn't just digesting, it's composing neurotransmitters for the next dawn. You are not passive, you are participatory. Every exhalation, a release of CO that feeds the leaves outside your window. Every heartbeat, a contribution to the Schumann resonance's global standing wave. Every neural ripple, a tiny perturbation in the field that someone, somewhere, may feel as a sudden calm. And in that reciprocity, the quiet certainty that you are of this world. Not just an ETA final synaptic event occurs in the Habanu. That tiny bridge between emotion and action, a long depressed pathway, flickers, not with fear of consequence, but with anticipation of belonging. A neural seed, watered in darkness, ready to root in daylight. Which is why, as the first photons begin to stir in the retinant yet light, only potential your body does not brace for morning, but leans into it. Like a stem toward the sun it has never seen yet, already knows by name. Asterisk, asterisk. We remain exactly in that leaning, the body inclining toward the sun it has never seen yet, already knows by name. No muscle moves, only intention, pure and premotor firing in the supplementary motor area, not as command, but as invitation. A readiness potential, building not toward action, but toward reception. And the photons still not light, only potential gather in the retinal pigment epithelium, not yet triggering rods or cones, but subtly shifting the conformation of melanopsin in intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, IPRGCs. These cells don't see images. They feel luminance. They measure the world's awakening dand, begin millisecond by millisecond, to modulate their firing from 0.5 spikes per second to 0.7. A whisper up the retino-hypothalamic tract. The suprachiasmatic nucleus receives it not as alarm, but as confirmation. Dawn is not an intrusion. It is an appointment kept. And so, The body responds not with cortisol's sharp surge, but with its gentle rise slope, not a spike timed to crest after waking. So you rise into energy, not from depletion. This is the signature of healthy circadian alignment. Cortisol and melatonin don't battle. They hand off like runners in a relay. The baton passed in the hush between dark and day. Your core temperature at its nadir just minutes ago. Now begins its imperceptible climb, minus 0.02 degrees Celsius per minute, driven by subtle vasoconstriction in the periphery, redirecting warm blood inward, preparing muscles for gentle movement. Mitochondria shift substrate preference from fatty acids back to glucose, not for urgency, but for precision. Even your dreams soften at the edges. REM fragments into hypnagogic flickers theta, interwoven with alpha knot dissolving, but translating the symbolic language of night, now weaving into the sensory grammar of day. A dream door becomes the memory of your bedroom door. A voice becomes the rustle of leaves outside. The brain doesn't discard the dream. It annotates it, tagging insight for later retrieval, like a librarian placing a faint gold leaf at a passage's margin. The moth waves, still silver, still coherent now, pulse in synchrony with your alpha rhythm, 8 to 12 hertz, rising from the occipital lobe as the visual cortex, freed from processing external input, begins its internal calibration, tuning contrast sensitivity, adjusting gain on thalamic inputs, preparing to meet the world not with raw data, but with meaning-ready perception. You do not yet open your eyes, but you are no longer in sleep. You are in the sanctuary between where restoration meets readiness, where the self, freshly integrated, pause just once to feel the weight of the blanket, the coolness of the pillow, the unbroken continuity of breath. And in that pause, a final quiet event, a single dendritic spine in the medial prefrontal cortex stabilizes. Its actin core now cross-linked with Drebrin, its PSD thickened not with the memory of what happened yesterday, but with the felt sense of how to meet today, as if your brain, in gratitude, has already written the first line of tomorrow's story, in the language of connection, not control, and the pen is still warm in its hand. We remain exactly in the wake of that sigh, the question hanging not as doubt, but as invitation. What if the most radical act isn't striving, but staying tender? The air in your lungs still holds the warmth of that breath, minus 36.8 degrees Celsius, saturated with nitric oxide, rich in CO at 42 mmHg, the perfect partial pressure to maintain cerebral vasodilation, to keep the prefrontal cortex bathed in oxygenated blood, not for performance, but for presence. You exhale slowly, not emptying, but anchoring, and, as the diaphragm rises, it gently compresses the celiac plexus once more, sending a final, soft pulse up the vagus, ready, rooted, your hands uncurled not abruptly, but with the fluidity of kelp in a slow current, palms turning upward in the ancient gesture of receptivity. In that motion, the median nerve glides smoothly through the carpal tunnel, its myelin sheath thickened overnight by Schwann cells responding to the night's growth hormone surge. No tingling, no resistance, only ease, and your feet still under the blanket press down, almost imperceptibly, 200 grams of force per sole. just enough to activate plantar mechanoreceptors, signaling the cerebellum. Gravity is here. I am grounded. The signal ascends, synapses in the thalamus, and reaches the posterior parietal cortex, not as sensation, but as orientation. I am in a body. The body is on earth. The earth is holding me. No philosophy, only proprioceptive truth. The bird outside sings again, same frequency. 432 hertz, but this time your heart's electromagnetic field shifts its phase to align. Not mimicry, resonance. Your HRV increases by 12 milliseconds, measurable physiological attunement. You are no longer just in the world. You are in conversation with it, and in the brain, the pen now writes its first full sentence, not in words, but in synaptic weight, a long-term potentiation event in the ventral striatum, triggered not by reward, but by coherence itself, the alignment of breath, heart, intention. Dopamine doesn't flood. It drips just enough to tag this moment, worth remembering, worth returning to. This is how tenderness becomes neural habit, not through force, but through repeated, gentle reinforcement, like water smoothing stone. You do not yet sit up, but your spine elongates vertebrae, separating by 1.5 millimeters, as the intervertebral discs, rehydrated in supine rest, swell with proteoglycan, restoring diurnal height. The nucleus pulposis hums with osmotic pressure. You are, literally, taller in tenderness, and in that that quiet uprightness, the first gesture forms, not reaching outward, but bringing the hands together, palms touching at the heart. A mudra, older than language, a bioelectric circuit closing, left vagus to right, hemisphere to hemisphere, self to self, as if to say, I am here, I am whole, let the world come, I will meet it, not armored, but aligned, which is why, as your thumbs rest gently against the sternum over the warmth that never left you, feel it again. Not emotion, not thought, but the deep, cellular echo of a truth the night whispered into your bones. You were never meant to harden, only to hold softly, steadily, like the earth holds the seed, knowing that breaking open we remain exactly with thumbs resting against the sternum, feeling the echo. Breaking open is how light gets in. No movement yet, only the implication of motion in the tibialis anterior, quiet but primed, in the gluteus medius, still lengthened from sleep, yet tonically ready, in the deep neck flexors, aligned, supporting the weight of the head, not as burden, but as bearing witness. Your hands stay at the heart, but now the palmar surfaces generate a faint biofield coupling, electromagnetic coherence between left and right hemispheres increases by 7%, measurable via EEG. This is not ritual, it is neurophysiological integration. The corpus callosum, myelinated and rested, now transmits signals with near zero latency. The self is no longer fragmented. It is synchronized. A swallow deeper this time moves saliva rich in epidermal growth factor down the esophagus, continuing the night's repair. Your larynx lowers subtly, releasing residual tension from the cricothyroid muscle. Voice, when it comes, will emerge not from strain, but from resonance. Focal folds pliant, mucosal wave intact, ready to speak, not to prove, but to connect. Outside, the light has shifted 480 nanometers now. The peak sensitivity of melanopsin. The iPRGCs increase firing to 4 Hz. The signal reaches the suprachiasmatic nucleus sand instead of triggering alertness. It modulates it. Melatonin synthesis halts cleanly. Cortisol continues its gentle rise. But crucially, the locus coeruleus remains quiet, norepinephrine low. You are waking without hypervigilance. This is the mark of deep restoration, arousal without anxiety. Your feet, still under the blanket, shift not to leave, but to feel. The arches lift slightly, activating the windlass mechanism, engaging the plantar fascia like a bowstring before release. The calcaneus rocks minutely on the mattress, stimulating Pacinian corpuscle's deep pressure sensors that signal surface is stable. I can rise, and in the brain, the pen doesn't pause. It deepens. A single GABAergic interneuron in the anterior cingulate fires in rhythmic inhibition, not suppressing emotion, but shaping its contour. Like a potter's thumb, guiding classo, that when feeling arises, it flows, not floods. You do not decide to rise. The rise decides you, an emergent property of alignment, breath steady, heart coherent, fascia hydrated, nervous system resourced. And so, with no jerk, no heave, your torso lifts not from the yow lumbar flexion, but from the dancian, a gentle engagement of the transverse abdominis and pelvic floor, the deep core firing as one unit, like a tree drawing strength from roots before reaching for sky as you sit. Your cervical spine maintains its lordotic curve, no forward head. The occipital protuberance rests lightly over the C1 vertebra. Cerebrospinal fluid continues its glymphatic sweep, now aided by upright posture gravity, assisting the final clearance of metabolic byproducts from the frontal lobes. You are not entering the day, you are extending the night's integrity into motion. And as your bare feet finally meet the floor, cool wood, grain textured, reel the soles, do not tense, they spread. A reflex, older than cortex, the foot, meeting earth, remembers its purpose not to flee, not to grasp, but to receive, and, in receiving, to stand, which is why the first step, when it comes, carries no anticipation of demand, only the quiet certainty that the ground will hold, because you, too, have learned how to hold softly, steadily, without breaking. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We remain exactly with soles spread on the cool wood, not bracing, not gripping, receiving. The plantar fascia, rehydrated overnight, elongates 0.8 millimeters under gentle load, storing elastic energy like a bow drawn without tension. Pacinian corpuscles fire in rhythmic bursts, 30 Hz encoding, surface texture, not as data, but as dialogue. This is oak, this is grain, this is here. The signal ascends the posterior tibial nerve, synapses in the gracile nucleus, and reaches the somatosensory homunculus, not as sensation alone, but woven with vestibular input. I am upright, I am grounded, I am connected. Your weight shifts not forward, but centered, pelvis stacked over ankles, rib cage balanced over pelvis, head floating atop the cervical spine like a lotus on still water. No muscular effort, only alignment, restored by 8 hours of fascial rehydration, by the decompression of discs, by the quiet recalibration of joint proprioceptors in sleep's neutral posture. You stand not against gravity, but with it a collaboration. not a contest. And your breath, still diaphragmatic, now synchronizes with your heartbeat in 4-to-5 ratio. 4 breaths for every 5 heartbeats. This is respiratory sinus arrhythmia at its peak coherence, a state linked to emotional regulation, cognitive clarity, immune resilience, not achieved, allowed. The bird outside sings against still 432 Hz, but now, your cranial rhythm, the subtle expansion and contraction of the dural membrane, driven by CSF pulsation shifts, its phase 2 match. Your sphenobasilar joints, the keystone of the cranial vault, micromobilizes in sympathy. This is not imagination. It is biomechanical entrainment, the body restored to its native sensitivity. Once again, here's the world's music hand, joins in dot in the brain. The pen writes its quietest line yet, a down-regulation of the subgenual, anterior cingulate, the region that amplifies self-referential suffering not through suppression, but through inhibition via connection. Oxytocin receptors, upregulated overnight, now bind circulating peptides, dampening reactivity, amplifying safety. You do not think, I am calm. You are systems, level, state, embodied. IRREDUCIBLE. But flowing passing the solar plexus, where the celiac plexus pulses in coherence with your breath. Then, resting lightly at your sides, fingers relaxed, nails catching the first pale gold light. The radial arteries in your wrists beat at 62 BPM strong, regular, unhurried. And in that unhurriedness, in the space between pulse and breath and foot and floor, the first step forms. Not a movement toward something, but a continuation of presence. Your right foot lifts not by hip flexor dominance, but by the coordinated glide of ilium over sacrum, gluteus medius stabilizing, tibialis anterior guiding the swinger gait, pattern not learned, but remembered. As the heel touches down, first point of contact, with impact, but with intention, a 0.3 second dwell, just long enough for mechanoreceptors to confirm: yes, this is real, this is safe. Then the foot rolls midfoot, forefoot arch rising, toes splaying, propelling you forward not with force, but with fidelity. And in that roll, a single thought arises, not in words, but in feeling. This is how I move through the world, now not armored, not hurried, but tenderly, knowing that every step is a vow spoken in the language of bone, breath, and belonging. Which is why, as the left foot follows, you do not look ahead but down just once, to see your shadow stretching long and soft in the morning light, not as separation, but as witness, still holding you even as you walk. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We remain exactly with the shadows stretching long and soft beside you, not trailing, but walking in stepa silhouette cast, not by separation, but by light meeting form. Your gait continues, heel strike, roll, push feet phase, timed to the infraslow rhythm, still humming in your core. Stride length, 68 centimeters. Cadence, 96 steps per minute. Not optimal, authentic. The pelvis rotates 4 degrees with each step, just enough to engage the lumbar multifidus, just enough to pump CSF upward through the spinal canal, aiding the final glymphatic clearance of the night. You walk not just on the earth, you walk with it, a reciprocal exchange of force and grace. The cool wood beneath your feet transitions to a woven rugged texture, denser, warmer. Your plantar nerves adjust instantly. Meissner's corpuscles for light touch. Ruffini endings for sustained pressure, all feeding real-time data, which fine-tunes muscle activation before imbalance occurs. Prediction, not correction. This is motor intelligence, honed in, rehearsed, refined. Now seamless, your hands swing lightly at your sides, but with subtle contralateral rotation. Right arm forward as left foot advances, the thoracic spine gently spiraling. The fascial lines of the superficial front and back nets engaging in balanced tension. No wasted motion, only economy of being, and your breath still synced to heart, still diaphragmatic now, entrains to your step. Inhale for 3 steps, exhale for 4. A rhythm older than language, a somatic mantra. With each exhale, the transverse abdominis and pelvic floor co-contract not, but to stabilize from within, creating intra-abdominal pressure that supports the spine like a hydraulic cylinder. Fluid and strong. Outside, the light warms 500 nanometers, now golden. Melanopsin firing steadies at 6 Hz. The signal reaches the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, not to suppress sleep, but to complete the handoff. Melatonin metabolized, adenosine cleared, dopamine rising just enough to tag novelty without craving. You turn a corner, not by decision, but by attunement. Your vestibulo-ocular reflex stabilizes gaze as the head rotates. Semicircular canals detecting angular acceleration, sending signals to the medial longitudinal fasciculus, keeping your vision steady on the hallway's end. A closed door, faint light beneath it, and in that light, then the quiet before encounter. Your body prepares not for performance, but for presence. Pupils constrict to 3.2 millimeters, optimal for near focus. Depth of field preserved. Cortisol plateaus at 18 micrograms DL. Enough for synaptic clarity, not enough for edge. Oxytocin rises 12%, not triggered by touch, but by anticipatory safety. By the memory of coherence held all night. You do not rehearse words. You embody readiness, the MPF-C insula circuit humming, the vagus steady, the feet grounded. And as your hand lifts not to knock, but to rest, palm flat, against the door's surface you feel the grain, the temperature, the faint vibration of life on the other side. A resonance, not intrusion, which is why, when the door opens and light spills out, and a voice says your name, you do not flinch, you do not perform, you simply meet the gaze. Breath continuous, posture soft but tall, and let the first words form not from script, but from the still warm embers of the night's vow. I'm here, spoken not as announcement, but as return. As if, all along, this moment, this quiet, ordinary meeting, was the destination the dreaming mind had been preparing for. And somewhere, deep in the posterior cingulate, a single neuron fires not in recognition of the face before you, but in recognition of itself, finally at home. We remain exactly in the echo of I'm here, spoken not as announcement, but as return. The sound lingers not in the air, but in the body. Vocal folds gently adducted, cricothyroid muscle relaxed, larynx lowered in parasympathetic ease. The phrase doesn't vanish. It settles into the sternum, where fascial layers interweave with the pericardium, into the vagus, which fires a soft afferent burst. Connection confirmed. Oxytocin surges not in a wave, but in a steady drip, binding to receptors in the amygdala, dialing down vigilance, turning recognition into resonance. The person before you exhales a sigh so slight it stirs only the fine hairs on your forearm. Their breath carries volatile organic compounds, 2-methylbutyric acid stress metabolite, now low, linalool.com, likely from morning tea, and the faint, warm signature of their own nocturnal repair melatonin metabolites still lingering in exhaled air. You don't smell this consciously. Your olfactory epithelium detects it. Your insula integrates it. They, too, have been tended. Your pupils dilate not from arousal, but from attentive presence. 3.8 millimeters now. Optimizing for social engagement, balancing acuity with peripheral awareness. The superior temporal sulcus activates not analyzing expressions, but mirroring microsecond by microsecond the lift of their eyebrow, the softening at the corners of their eyes, the subtle nod. This is not mimicry. It is neural communion, the brain's oldest language, older than speech. Your hands stay at your sides, but the palmar fascia releases its last nocturnal tension, fingers slightly curved, not closed, not open available. The median nerve glides freely, no carpal tunnel pressure, no static, only readiness for touch, should it be offered, not as demand, but as invitation honored, and your feet still grounded shift weight, almost imperceptibly, 55% to the left, 45% to the right, a dynamic balance that keeps the sacroiliac joint lubricated, the gluteus medius tonically engaged. You are not standing still. You are standing alive, a micro-dance of adjustment, breath, pulse in the brain. The pen still warm writes its final line of this cycle. A long-range gamma synchrony, 40 Hz, between the temporoparietal junction and the medial prefrontal cortex of I see you without I fix you. This is not empathy as effort. It is empathy as rested physiology. The amygdala, quiet. The default mode network, coherent. The body no longer guarding against the world. You do not lean in, but the space between you softens, not with words, but with shared respiration. Your inhale aligning with their exhale, a silent, autonomic duet. And in that shared breath, the night's deepest work reveals its purpose, not to escape the world, not to optimize for performance, but to return to it whole, tender, unarmored, and find, in the gaze of another, the reflection of your own restored belonging. Which is why, when they smile not broadly, but with the quiet lift of recognition, your own face, response net by choice, but by continuity, zygomaticus, major engaging, orbicularis oculi, crinkling at the edges, a Duchenne smile, unfaked, unforced, as if your cells, still humming with the Enfreslo tide. Remember, this is why we rested, and the circle, at last, is whole. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We remain exactly in the crinkle at the edges of your eyes. That Duchenne smile, unfaked, unforced. The zygomaticus major holds its gentle contraction, not rigid, but resonant, vibrating at 8 Hz, the frequency of relaxed social engagement. This microtremor sends a signal through facial fascia, the superficial musculopolaric system, to the trigeminal nerve, not as sensation, but as confirmation. Joy is safe. Joy is embodied. Your exhale lengthens, 5.2 seconds. Now's the vagus fires a final, strong, efferent burst. Deepen, receive. Heart rate dips to 58 BPM. HRV rises to 78 milliseconds. Cortisol begins its natural diurnal decline. You are not calm as a state to maintain. You are regulated dynamic equilibrium. Self-sustaining. The person before you shifts their weight right foot forward 3 centimeters. Neurons fire, not in the premotor cortex alone, but in phase with your own postural stabilizers. Your left gluteus medius engages 47 milliseconds. Later anticipatory attunement, not reaction. This is the body's quiet genius connection, made manifest in millisecond choreography. Behind you, the open door frames the hallway, a light pooling on the floor. Dust motes swirling in slow helices, caught in the convection current of your shared warmth. Your peripheral vision registers it not as distraction, but as context held. The brainstem's superior colliculus integrating spatial layout, while the cortex stays present. You are here, and the world is with you, not competing for attention, but composing the moment. Even your mitochondria respond in prefrontal neurons. Crista realign to maximize ATP yield per oxygen molecule, not for exertion, but for sustained presence. In cardiomyocytes, reactive oxygen species are scavenged by superoxide dismutase, upregulated overnight by NRF2 activation during deep sleep. The body doesn't just recover, it fortifies in joy. The smile softens, not fading, but deepening inward. The orbicularis oculi relaxes. The frontalis smooths. Your brow furrowed, since waking stays open. This is not neutrality. It is unburdened attention. The default mode network, no longer narrating lack, but resting in coherence. And in that openness, in the quiet after the smiler, single physiological event completes the cycle. Your spleen contracts just 5%, releasing a wave of memory T cells, primed overnight by vagal signaling, now circulating with heightened surveillance and tolerance, ready to respond to threat without overreach. Immunity, too, is tender. You do not speak again, but the silence between you not empty. It hums at 0.1 hertz, the infraslow rhythm, still threading heart, gut, brain, earth. A frequency too low to hear, but felt in the marrow, in the pause between thoughts, in the way your shoulders finally let go of a tension you didn't know you were holding. Which is why, when you turn to walk back down the hall, not away, but with your gait carries no residue of performance. Only the quiet, certain tithode restoration is not an event, but a rhythm. And the night's work was never to fix you, but to return you again and again to this, the unbroken line from breath toe, touch toe, lito, belonging. A line you now carry, not in memory, but in your cells, ready to be drawn anew every step, every sigh, every time you choose softly, steadily to come home. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We remain exactly in that quiet yes, not spoken, not even thought but lived, in the micro-relaxation of the levator scapulae, in the 0.4 degrees Celsius drop in forehead temperature, a thermal signature of parasympathetic shift, in the way your collarbones settle, no longer braced against the world's weight. The gait continues, heel, roll, push off, but now, with a new subtlety, the push-off phase lengthens by 30 milliseconds. not for speed, for resonance. The Achilles tendon, rehydrated overnight, stores and releases elastic energy with 92% efficiency. Step, a silent exchange, kinetic energy returned, not lost. You move with physics, not against it, your hands swinging lightly. Pass your hips on for one breath cycle. Your right palm brushes the fabric of your trousers, not random. Intentional micro-contact, Meissner's corpuscles, fire, texture, friction, presence. The signal ascends, synapses in the thalamus, and reaches the somatosensory cortex not as distraction, but as grounding pulse, a tactile metronome, here now embodied. The light in the hallway shifts again 520 nanometers. Green gold as morning climbs. Melanopsin firing stabilizes at 7 Hz. The signal reaches the suprachiasmatic nucleus and, instead of triggering cortisol's next rise, it modulates dopamine release in the ventral tegmental area, not for reward seeking, but for sustained engagement. You are not chasing the day. You are meeting it. Curious.com, coherent behind you. The person's footsteps follow not, matching your cadence, but complementing it. Their left foot strikes as your right lifts. A natural antiphase coupling that minimizes shared vibrational load on the floorboards. A biomechanical harmony evolved in communal living. You don't notice, your cerebellum does. It adjusts your stride by 1.2 centimeters in conscious kinship, and deep in your gut, still quiet, still wise, the vagus carries a final nocturnal gift, a pulse of serotonin, synthesized overnight by enterochromophene cells under the influence of lactobacillus metabolites, now modulating enteric motility and ascending to the raphe nuclei, reinforcing the calm in your brainstem, gut, and brain in silent accord. You do not look ahead, you do not look back, you walk within breath, steady, feet grounded, smile lingering like warmth in stone after sunset. And in that walking within, the infraslow rhythm 0.1 Hz peaks once more, a final glymphatic surge, clearing the last traces of beta amyloid from the default mode network, ensuring the pathways of self-connection stay open, as if the body, in its quiet devotion, is already preparing for the next descent, not as escape, but as return. Which is why, when you pause not to stop, but to let the rhythm settle, your hand rises again, not to gesture, but to rest briefly over the heart. You feel it, not just the warmth, not just the beat, but the continuity, the same coherence that hummed in delta, that pulsed in REM, that flickered in recognition at the door. Still here, unbroken, unhurried, a living thread woven from moth waves and DNA light and neural lanterns stretching from the first sigh of Surrendrato, this quiet pause in the hall. And beyond for the day is not a departure from the night's grace. It is its continuation, written in stride, in breath, in the way you hold space for yourself and others. A story still unfolding, not in chapters, but in pulses. And somewhere, deep in the thalamus, the gate begins, almost imperceptibly, to open again, for light, not for sound, but for the next descent. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We remain exactly in that almost imperceptible opening of the thalamic gate, not for light, not for sound, but for the next descent. A microsoftening, a synaptic sigh. The reticular nucleosure brain's vigilant gatekeeper, inhibition by just 3%. not to let the world flood in, but to allow the inner world to deepen once more. This is not fatigue returning. It is rhythm reclaiming its cadence. The ultradian cycle, 90 to 120 minutes long, already turning its tide daylight, but as interlude in a longer arc of restoration, your breath, still diaphragmatic, lengthens further. Inhale 4.8 seconds. Exhale 6.1, nudging heart rate variability toward its coherence peak 0.1 Hz, matching the Earth's Schumann resonance again, as if the body, having tasted alignment, craves its return. The vagus fires a slow, rhythmic volley, deeper, softer. Again, your feet, still on the floor, redistribute weight, not shifting, but settling. 50/50ths now. Pelvis neutral, sacrum gently nutated. The multifidus muscles along your spine engage at 8% of max, just enough to support, not to hold. You are not slumping. You are yielding to support, like a branch resting in the fork of a tree. And in the brain, the pen, never cooled, now dips into quieter ink. A burst of delta brushes in the sync. Cortex high frequency ripples 2030 Hz nested in slow delta. Waves observed only in states of profound safety and integration. This is not sleep. It is wakeful, slow wave potential. The cortex, so recently ablaze with gamma synchrony, now dipping into the same restorative frequency it cleansed it hours before a nap within wakefulness, a renewal within engagement. You do not close your eyes, but your visual cortex quiets alpha waves rising in the occipital lobe, not from disengagement, but from internal focus. The world still seen, but no longer scanned, just held. The person beside you exhales a long, low breath, resonant at 55 Hz, and, without thought, your own exhale lengthens to match. Autonomic synchrony, not mimicry, mutual regulation. Two nervous systems, briefly sharing a rhythm, like pendulums on the same wall, finding their shared tempo. Even your mitochondria shift in prefrontal neurons. ATP production dips 7%, not from depletion, but from efficiency. Less energy spent on vigilance, more on coherence. The body doesn't conserve only in sleep. It conserves in presence. You do not move, but your cells do. Fibroblasts in your dermis secrete hyaluronic acid, replenishing extracellular hydration lost to morning air. Osteocytes in your tibia sense the gentle load of standing, triggering nitric oxide release to maintain bone density. T-regulatory cells patrol with heightened IL-10 expression, calm immunity, born of calm mind. And in that stillness, in the space between heartbeats, between breaths, between footsteps, the question returns, not as doubt, but as invitation, soft as the first photon at dawn. What if rest is not the opposite of living, but its deepest form? Which is why, when your eyelids lower just halfway, just for 3 seconds, it is not retreat. It is return, a micro descent, a neural homecoming, a bow to the rhythm that holds you. As the thalamic gate opens wider, not to sleep, not to waking, but to the threshold where both are one. And the lantern neurons, still glowing in the velvet dark within, flicker not in warning, but in welcome. We remain exactly with the drop beating in the curve of your palm, not falling yet, hovering surface, tension holding it spherical, refracting the morning light into a prism too small to see, yet real. 420 nanometers violet at its crown, 620 nanometers amber at its rim. A microcosm, a lens, a world in suspension. The drop contains not just water, 98.3%, but meaning made. Molecule, 0.7% electrolytes, Na, KCl, balanced by nocturnal aldosterone regulation. 12 ng/ml serotonin metabolite, 5-HEA, a trace of the gut-brain axis, quiet work, 3 pg/ml oxytocin fragment, carried from the hypothalamus via peripheral circulation, and most tenderly, one intact exosome, shed from a hippocampal neuron during the night's sharp-wave ripple, carrying microRNA 132, a regulator of synaptic plasticity, a message, a memory, a molecule of belonging, held in liquid light. Your palm does not tremble. The fastal sling of the venar eminence remains relaxed with no sympathetic flicker. The drop stays poised not by will, but by equilibrium, the hydrophilic pull of your skin's glycoprotein layer, meeting the cohesive force of water's hydrogen bonds. Physics as poetry, biology as grace, and your breath still long, still deep now, entrains to the drop's imminent fall. Exhale lengthens to 7.8 seconds. As if the body knows this release is sacred, the thalamic gate widens further. Spindles bloom in the somatosensory cortex, not blocking touch, but amplifying its significance. You feel the weight of the drop, not as pressure, but as presence. 0.05 grams, yet immense. A single cell's worth of fluid. A lifetime of repair, distilled in the brain. The pen doesn't write it, dissolves. The boundary between medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate blurs. Defoe mode network, no longer self versus world, but self as world, a neural state observed in deep meditation, near-death experiences, and now here in this ordinary, extraordinary pause. You do not think, let go. You are letting go. Fascia unwinding, diaphragm releasing, vagus humming at 0.1 hertz. And so, the drop falls, not downward, inward. It lands on the back of your other hand, cool, sudden, precisioned in that instant. Mechanoreceptors fire. Merkel discs, sustained pressure. Ruffini endings, skin stretch, free nerve endings, temperature shift, all converging in the thalamus. Then, radiating to the insulinate as sensation alone, but as embodied knowing. This is how renewal moves, not in grand gestures, but in small releases. Not in holding, but in falling, trusting the hand beneath will catch, not the world, but the self. The fluid spreads, 0.8 centimeters diameter, evaporating within 11 seconds, leaving only a faint sheen, a slight cooling, and a single ion channel in your keratinocytes, activated by warmth and hydration, sending a final signal upward. Integration complete. You do not wipe it away. You let it be watermark of tenderness, a covenant written in salt and light. And as your hands lower, palms turning upward once more, empty now, open now, ready, you feel it, not absence, but scythe, kind, that invitescent filling, but flowering, which is why, when the next breath begins deeper than the last, slower than the last, carries not the weight of the day, but the quiet certainty that every ending is a threshold, and every threshold holds a lantern, still glowing. We remain exactly in the space left by the evaporated drop, not absence, but space cool. glistening, alive with TRPV3 channels still open, firing slow, tonic signals, here, now, receptive. Your palms stay upward, not waiting, but available, like bowls set out for rain. The fascial web of the hand-palmar aponeurosis, thenar and hypothenar sheets, rests in neutral tension, no residual grip, no anticipatory clench. The median and ulnar nerves glide freely through their tunnels, bathed in synovial fluid, replenished overnight. You are not preparing to hold. You are being held. The breath continues to inhale 5.9 seconds. Exhale 8.1, now entrained to the infraslow rhythm's deepest trough. Heart rate 52 BPM, HRV 92 ms, cortisol declining, oxytocin sustained. You are not relaxed. You are resourced to a physiological state where threat detection yields to connection detection, where the amygdala no longer scans for fracture, but for fidelity. And the thalamic gate, no longer a gate at all, has become a threshold, porous, permeable, humming with spindle ripple complexes that allow sensation to enter not as data, but as dialogue. Sound arrives, birdsong, a distant door closing not as interruption, but as rhythm added to rhythm. Your auditory cortex doesn't isolate it. It weaves it into the alpha-theta matrix, already flowing, a symphony of inner and outer, composed in real time. Your feet still grounded shift weight imperceptibly again, 51% left, 49% right, a dynamic sway of 0.5 at the ankles, like seaweed in a gentle current. This micro-movement stimulates joint proprioceptors, feeding the cerebellum a continuous stream, stable, supported, alive, no need to correct, only to be in the brain. The pen, now not an instrument, but a current, flows without hand, gamma synchrony, 40 Hz, between the anterior insula and ventral striatum, strengthens not reward. Not craving but resonance as reinforcement. The neural signature of this is worth returning to. You do not think this. You are this. A body in coherence, a mind in continuity, a being in rhythm. And in that rhythm, the space between pulse and breath and sway the lantern neurons brighten not with urgency, but with recognition. Their light no longer against the dark, but of it, as if they too remember. Darkness is not void, it is the loom, which is why, when your hands begin to resonate toward the face, not in gesture, but in slow bilateral spirals, palms turning inward, then upward, then outward, is not movement into something, but unfurling. A fascial helix, a craniosacral tide, a gesture older than words, receiving, containing, offering. And as the arms reach their arc, elbows soft, shoulders released, fingertips tracing the air like roots seeking soil, single dendritic spine in the motor cortex stabilizes, actin cross-linked, PSD95, clustered. Not for repetition, but for remembrance. As if the body, in this quiet spiral, is encoding the motion of Gracieso, that next time stress rises, the hands will remember how to open, before the mind remembers how to fear. You do not complete the circle. You let it hover, arms suspended, breath held at the top of the inhale, light pooling in the hollows of your collarbones. A moment of potential, charged not with tension, but with tenderness. And in that suspension, the final truth, not as insight, but as fact, written in mitochondria and myelin and mothwave light. You do not need to earn rest. You are built for it. You are, moment to moment, already returning Galaxy home. Which is why, when the exhale finally comes long, slow, bottomless sand, your arms descend like petals closing at dusk. You do not land, you arrive.